My name is Dr. Joanne Garde Hansen, and I'm Associate Professor of Media and Communication at the University of Warwick. And today I want to talk to you about the research that has been undertaken in the United Kingdom and that is connecting with research in Brazil. And this revolves around the relationship between media and memory and flood and drought resilience. I'd like to say hello to my co-presenters in my panel, particularly Carlos and Danilo, and I hope they have perhaps given you a little bit of background around this particular area, and I apologise that this paper is in English, and I hope that you can follow me. So there I go, floating away like a bubble, and I just wanted to draw attention to quite a few projects in the UK that have been bubbling up over the last 8 years. Certainly water, represented as deluge and destruction, has entered the national mediated consciousness of the United Kingdom, particularly since the summer of 2007. Considered the worst peacetime disaster, the UK floods of 2007 triggered memories of the Great Floods of 1947. Water stories really began to circulate, and we captured some of these through a variety of media, art, literature, music, folk memory and photography in the Living Flood Histories project. This was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. This led directly to the Sustainable Flood Memories project, which was based upon the 2007 floods, when Twitter was only a baby and Facebook still finding its feet. A knowledge exchange project with the United Kingdom's Environment Agency extended the storytelling of flooding in the UK, sharing do-it-yourself narratives across river catchments with their own watery sense of place. And this was part of a flood-drought continuum that led to much larger projects on narratives of water scarcity called the DRY Project, Drought, Risk and You. And this is connected to the other water story research projects on hydro-citizenship, multi-story water, as well as more applied research on developing a flood memory app, and in our own research with Danilo and Carlos, narratives of water. For a country surrounded by water, where talking about the weather is a kind of national pastime, but sometimes our only topic of conversation with strangers, the UK is producing spheres of multidisciplinary water research that are becoming increasingly connected to one another. In all this research, we have explored landscape, water and narrative to understand the mobility of flood and drought memory, its flows and frictions across different socio-demographic groups who live with either a watery or dry sense of place. The value of memories to be abstracted from these environments is the critical issue. In terms of representation, flooding in particular represents a globally mediated repertoire of deluge and disaster. The ability of this research to inform our understanding of and respect for water and its movement through built, natural, canalised, neglected and polluted landscapes is the main aim. From getting rid of water in a country with a traditionally watery sense of place, to slowing it down and learning to live with water. In the urban environment and the suburban home, floods, for example, can be catastrophic. Flood risk and flood events may require a rational, multi-stakeholder response debated in the public sphere. Yet in our research, we were focused on the stories and images of flooding that were very personal and that were loaded with aesthetic, emotive, and performative power. A typical home video of one of the largest rivers of the United Kingdom flowing through your home. More pertinently for media and memory studies, and for those researchers interested in the mediation of memory, story, narrative, as nature penetrates the domestic scene, is the transformation of the home video into evidence, often redistributed online through networks of friends as well as media organisations. These form citizen witnessing of environmental damage, family mementos for future generations are lost, images of active helplessness, and more importantly for the many UK participants in our research, this was the audio-visual proof for the insurance company. Mediations of flood then also reveal the underlying economies of remembering water. There is a UK policy around post-2007 floods in which we have seen a real shift to the local. Here, the focus is upon positive community action and its future potential. This isn't simply about civic participation, it's a recognition that there has been a retreat of the state. And in a 2008 report to government by Pitt, the idea was that the community should lead on adaptation planning for resilience, that there should be distributed responsibilities for dealing with residual flood risk. And this retreat of the state and this expectation that the community undertake its own risk and resilience work has implications for community awareness, knowledge bases and action. One approach then is to reactivate the dormant memories, histories, representations, artefacts of flooding. In our research on floods, we uncovered through memory work a hidden lived history that demonstrates an environmental literacy towards resilience, one that is held by a particular generation but may not be passed down. Formal and informal flood marks on buildings and homes are really important. The formal ones tend to stay, the informal ones, as in you can see image D, where someone simply writes on a whiteboard, well, they disappear. These are not only official and unofficial flood markers. Some are very important in terms of flood heritage, placed on a famous church wall, one of many markers over the centuries, as a reminder to all who visit, but also perhaps on an important farmhouse wall as a family reminder to future generations. Built walls, embankments, flood defence systems, an extra course of bricks and stones, sandbags, raised doorsteps, raised electrical sockets at waist height, materialise an environmental literacy that seeks to remind us that the river has and will make its mark in these human spaces. And these reminders, these official and unofficial memories, are archival and are also held in archives, newspaper archives, photographic archives. These are personal and collective memories of flooding and flood risk, from media and archives that play a significant and often under-researched role in the individual, community or society's sense of preparedness for flood. Some might argue that these are non-scientific, that they are only anecdotal memories. But anecdotes are performative. They demand to be told. And anecdotal memories demonstrate traditions of storytelling about water more generally. Informal remembrance is inherited within families, but also the challenges of persistence and transiency of flood materialisation through storytelling in an increasingly mobile and digitally literate society. In a community defined by its flood heritage, there is a dynamic interplay of active remembering and active forgetting, and both of these are at work in different ways and in different media. There are, of course, collective memories of flooding mediatised by national and international storytellers. Here's a really good example of the many ways in which it becomes very difficult to talk about drought in the United Kingdom, because much of the mainstream news is entirely focused upon having a watery country surrounded by water, and in our flood-rich period prone to rising tides and rising fluvial and pluvial water levels. So when the press does get a narrative concerning drought, it's unbelievable and dismissed. So one key feature of a country, community or region mediated by flood drama, and you might want to recall that flooding is framed by media in biblical terms and is very dramatic and traumatic. The problem is that drought, water scarcity, remains hidden and actively forgotten. Unlike flood, which is dramatic and in some respects media-friendly, drought is slow and invisible and an undramatic series of events, unless, of course, it moves into fire weather. Several studies have shown, it seems, say Joe Smith, Chukuk and Butler, that the main narratives or frames the media choose or are given by scientists, scientific reports, government departments or NGOs are very often ones of negative impacts, disaster stories or uncertainty. This is not surprising given that many of the impacts the climate models predict are negative. Rising sea levels, more droughts in some areas, more extreme weather events in other areas, and so on. Also, as much as climate science concerns the future, it inevitably involves degrees of uncertainty about the timing, pace, and severity of possible impacts from a changing climate. This means, therefore, that uncertainty about the future is going to have to, in some way, draw upon the past. If we're going to have all sorts of potential scenarios presented to us, they need to, in some way, draw upon our past thinking and our memories and our stories of past engagement. When we move from flooding to drought, we have found a slightly different approach, because here drought is not as mediatised as flooding. In the Drought Risk Anew project, the research involves 7 key areas of England, Scotland and Wales, and the aim is to set a different agenda, to recognise that narrative plays the key role in an understanding of climate, and therefore to think creatively and use media to produce old and new stories of drought. The aim, as you can see at the top of the slide, is to integrate narrative methods and resources and drought science. So bringing together narrative and science to assist multi-stakeholder decision-making for drought mitigation and management. So what does this mean? Well, firstly, it concerns capturing UK attitudes through storytelling and memory of drought and water management at a whole range of scales. These scales not only relate to the 7 different catchments, but also to different kinds of domains: urban design, the built environment, business utilities and tourism, agriculture and horticulture, ecosystem services, health and well-being, public communities, water supply companies. It is about engaging in narrative at all of these domain levels that we can start to connect with ordinary people's understanding and values associated with water. And here is a kind of model of how we expect our utility to exchange the narratives across the domains. So you'll see stage 1 represents the domains I just mentioned, and each of these domains cut across the 7 different catchments. What's particularly unique about this project compared to other drought projects is that it engages with drought science and narrative at a catchment scale rather than at a national scale or as at an international global scale. This is drilling down drought understanding at a quite a granular level in relation directly to a specific catchment and river basin. And we call them catchments in Brazil. I think you probably call them basins. And the idea is, we're in stage 1 at the moment and now moving into stage 2, is to develop a utility, an online utility, that would allow science narrative exchange across these domains, within catchments, and across catchments as well. It really is about getting these narratives, these stories, to connect to one another. It also involves collecting stories and undertaking storytelling work with different kinds of stakeholders, from businesses through to NGOs, through to public sector, to wildlife trusts, to heritage trusts, to natural resource organisations, as well as water companies. So a key example might be who are we getting the drought narratives from? Well, these are farmers, landowners, indigenous populations, domestic water users, as just some examples. And how? A wide range of methods, from oral histories, interviews, archives, sometimes we do river walks. And the framings are important. How the narratives are framed and how the stories reveal to us the narrative framings that people are engaged in around climate change as well as climate denial, water versus heat, the social construction of drought, the relationship of women and men to drought in different ways, adaptation based on age and your feeling of risk versus resilience. Narratives of identity and perseverance are pretty important. And if you're a farmer and you're concerned with desertification, then you're really focused upon the stories that irrigation and irrigation possibilities can bring to your environment. This in some ways all leads to a wealth of research in the United Kingdom around the concept of hydro-citizenship. This is a public sphere, I guess, of water politics. It's about developing a historical, vertical understanding of citizenship in relation to water, as well as a horizontal, at this moment in time, understanding. And that means looking at how we have marked the environment, how we have learned to be resilient through memory, through passing down personal, family, and local memories, how we can draw upon storage, recording, and accessing of climate change data within the community, as well as nationally and globally. The image you see down on the left-hand side is the wall of a cathedral in the middle of England, which has marks on it dating back quite some time, quite a few hundred years. And that really gives people a sense of themselves as having a flood heritage. So this really asks that researchers start thinking about a physical, cultural, social systems approach. This is about memory research in communities who are engaged in their environment in situ. It's about working across domains, regions, or catchments, understanding tipping points, reflecting people's systems' behaviour, What are the trigger thresholds for stories moving from the private to the public domain? It's about experiencing expert and lay expertise exchange and putting them on a level playing field, creating a multi-stakeholder approach, opening feedback loops from memory work to community to policy over time, and creating memories of participation, narrative mix, dialogue, and lay indigenous values. And this really connects with Brazil, because there has really been a really interesting exchange of knowledge with regards to Brazil. The Global South has differing models of productive mutual learning. We can look at redefinitions of value, culture, and the economy. And in terms of cultural policy, there's been a real shift. Rather than thinking about culture in economic terms, this is what Bell and Oakley said, rather than seeing culture as a resource to be used economically, the argument would be to see economic resources, from water to housing to green spaces, in cultural terms, to help understand what they mean to people and hence how they can be valued in terms other than the economic. Bell and Oakley continued. In Brazil, as well as in other parts of the Global South, many cultural pursuits that have hitherto been described as intangible cultural heritage, whether ceremonies, rituals, spiritual practices, are seen as continuous with an economy which includes a wide range of non-commercial cultural presence. So therefore this requires us to think about story as utility, story as actionable knowledge. In empirical research, the idea would be story as data. We want to do something more than this. We want to talk about how stories can be confrontational, challenging, make you reflect, be inspiring, be informative, and that some of those stories might even be transformative, and to really sketch out how we move from story through to stakeholders who are interested in those stories, and how we might focus on the utility value of stories as a counter-argument to them not being seen just as data by some stakeholders. Stories are the richer analogues of paper-based case studies. Perhaps we should identify what makes a story transformative. How does the listener connect personally, emotionally with the storyteller? Does the listener trust the storyteller? Does the listener see these connections and understand their relevance to their own lives and others? And then, as researchers, how can we formalise, code and tag stories in relation to this? And this leads us really to my final slide. It's led to some really interesting collaboration with Danilo in the spring Warwick exchange around narratives of water. And here we're thinking about cross-disciplinary approaches to water. From my perspective, what is the cultural value of water? How are narratives of water communicated and by whom? And what I'm learning from Danilo is much more about participatory water governance in a Brazilian context, learning more about the role of media and communications for water councils. And together I hope we can explore the role of story, memory and narrative for adaptive resilience. Really this is about good narratives. What makes an interesting sequence of events? Who are the rich and specific characters? How can we integrate different ways of knowing? And what can we do to ensure good narrating? I hope today I've managed to narrate these slides in a good way for you. It's always good to get some stories from Brazil, and so I'd like to take the opportunity, if you wish, to share a story of water from Brazil. Please do write a memory or experience. Normally, if I was there, I'd give you a piece of paper with a raindrop on it, but I'm not there, so you've got a virtual version. But please do send me an email with your story, and I look forward to hearing from you. And I'm sorry I'm not there to answer any questions, but I hope that Danilo and Carlos are able to answer any questions on my behalf. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you for listening.